holding the line with dwindling supplies and impossible odds, were forced to surrender. What followed was the harrowing Bataan death march, and yet, even in defeat, a different kind of victory emerged, a legacy of honor, bravery, unity, and an unbreakable spirit. Today we gather to remember, to honor, and to ensure that the stories of those who fought and fell and those who survived continue to be told with dignity and the clarity that they deserve. It's my honor to guide you through today's program. We are joined by individuals who carry deep knowledge, lived experience, and shared reverence for the history. Now it's my honor to recognize and welcome some of the most important guests among us today, the families of our Bataan POW descendants. Your presence here reminds us that history is not just a series of dates and events, it is lived and carried through generations, through your fathers, grandfathers, and uncles, and loved ones who endured unimaginable hardship. We are given a glimpse into the true cost of freedom. And through you, their legacy continues to speak, quietly, powerfully, and with dignity. We thank you for being here today and sharing your family story, and for allowing us the privilege of honoring them alongside you. Please join me in welcoming the descendants of our Bataan prisoners of war, daughters of Jack Aldrich, Susie and Delaware and Barbara Burns, son of Avery Cox, William Bill Cox, family of Private First Class Thomas Vernon, Louie Long, sister of Vernon Long, Billie Jean Sawyer. We're so grateful for her being here today, and Karen Moyer, nephew of Vernon, Tommy St. Peters, accompanied by Hazel Levitt, niece of Vernon Long, Louis Odom, accompanied by Sarah Teague, niece of Vernon Long, Julia Boyce, and son of Corporal Guy G. Wright, Wayne Wright, accompanied by his wife, Brenda Wright. Now I'd like to introduce someone who has worked tirelessly to preserve and illuminate this chapter in our past, our curator, Aaron Krebsbach, whose dedication ensures that these memories remain alive for generations to come. To discuss his exhibit, The Long Way Home, the identification of Private First Class Thomas Vernon Louie Long. Please help me in welcoming Aaron.
Thank you, Loretta. First, I'd like to take a moment to thank the family of Private First Class Long for being here, as well as all of your assistance in us bringing together this exhibit. We honestly couldn't have done it without you. I'd also like to thank Loretta for her assistance in pulling together the exhibit and doing ties between us, the Bataan Building, our veteran services. And I'd also like to thank our interns here at the museum for the hard work they put together in helping us bring this together. So how this exhibit came about, if we go back to the end of October, beginning of November last year, I was called up front to speak with one of our family members from the 200th. They came to update us about some of the information they had recently received about the passing of their service member. I was told this incredible story about a man from Portales who was devoted to his family, was considered a doting older brother, who went over to fight for our freedom, and then ended up dying in Cabanatuan. This is the story of Private First Class Thomas Vernon Louie Long. He would grow up to be called by his middle name Vernon. He was born in Portales on January 21st, 1915, the second child and only boy to Oscar and Betty Long. Vernon often doted on his youngest sister, Billie Jean, and Jean often would share some stories back when he was recently re-identified about how she used to love pineapple, and he would go and buy a pineapple, chop it up, and allow her to eat her fill before he allowed any of his other siblings to. Jean also remembers how one Christmas there was a contest for a Shirley Temple doll where you had to guess the number of beans in a gallon jar. So Vernon went out, bought a gallon jar, filled it with beans, counted, and won her the doll, which she kept till she was 18. Vernon attended Portales High School, where he played football, mainly center, and he graduated in 1933. He would go on to play football for 3 other universities, including New Mexico A&M, which is now New Mexico State, and Las Cruces. While playing football, his father insisted that the family would go to the games, but his sister Jean couldn't stand to possibly see her brother get hurt, so she would often listen from the car. Like many other college students, Vernon would also work while he was in college. He drove truck for the CCC for a year until he found employment elsewhere. Well, Vernon would graduate from New Mexico A&M with a degree in agriculture. While Vernon was in college, the world around him was changing. In Europe, Hitler and the Nazis were sweeping across Germany, and the battle for the Blitz was on. In the Pacific, Japan was growing her empire, pushing on U.S. interests, and the Sino-Japanese War was raging. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was tasked with knowing that at some point the U.S. would be at war and preparing for war without showing that he was ready. So in 1940, the Selective Service and Training Act was started, also known as the Burke-Watson Act. It's the first peacetime draft in our history, and Vernon was caught in it. He and 24 other men from Portales received their draft notice and were ordered to report to the draft board. They left ahead of a sandstorm in March of 1941 to come here to Santa Fe. They came through this building to be processed here when it was the National Guard Armory. From there, he received his orders for training to go and join in Battery E, 2nd Battalion, 200th Coast Artillery, New Mexico National Guard. And he was shipped off to Fort Bliss with the other inductees. You could say that the training for the 200th was quite successful. They participated in a competition against other National Guard units, as well as regular Army units for accuracy and rate of fire, in which they outperformed everybody. The question was now whether they would be deployed to the Philippines or the Aleutian Islands. In the end, they were chosen to go to the Philippines. 1,816 men strong, they departed Fort Bliss on a tour through New Mexico, stopping in Albuquerque on their way to San Francisco Bay. Vernon's family would come to Albuquerque to see him off at the train station, not knowing that this would be the last time they saw him alive. The 200th would board the USS President Pierce and the USS Calvin Coolidge on the way to the Philippines, with a brief stopover at Pearl Harbor to refuel and resupply. They arrived in the Philippines in late September, early October of 1941, and like any other soldier, Vernon would write home to tell them about the world he had never seen before. He compared the tropics of the Philippines with that of home Portales, with the high desert, and how the heat and humidity would be pretty bad at the height of the day, but was pretty tolerable in the afternoon and night when it cooled off. He'd also talk about how the might of the US dollar, how $1 US would equal about 2 Filipino pesos. The price of beer, 12.5 cents a can, is what he told his father. And a carton of cigarettes, 50 cents. He also wrote home about military life and complained how it wasn't much different than what they were doing at Bliss. The only difference is now they were doing it in a covered barracks versus tents out in a field. He told them that they were stationed 57 miles from Manila at Clark Field. They were quartered at Fort Stutzenberg and tasked with guarding the airfield. He'd go into Manila every once in a while, at some points with officers, and said that the people there were quite friendly. And one of the last things that he would write home about was one thing that many soldiers at the time did, to ensure that the money he was sending home to assist the family was getting there. December 7th, 1941, as President Roosevelt said, the date that would live in infamy. The Japanese would attack Pearl Harbor, the biggest surprise attack that the U.S. has ever witnessed. On the other side of the international date line, it's December 8th, and it's early in the morning. At 3 a.m., the 200th was put on full alert in preparation for the Japanese attack. Later in the day, because of all of the bad weather at Formosa, where the Japanese were based to attack Clark Field, the attack wouldn't come until almost midday, in which the 200th would be one of the first battalions to engage and successfully shoot down a U.S. enemy plane credited Battery H out of Taos. Later, the command in the Philippines would realize that the 200th alone was not enough to stand against the tide of airplanes and Japanese Zeros. So the 515th Coast Artillery was one of the first regiments formed in the flames of war. 500 men and 20 officers from the 200th were broken off and into the 515th, supplemented by reserves and regular army, and Vernon was among them. He would end up in Battery B of the 515th. The last letter his family would receive to him would get to them around Christmas time. While they were reading his letter, Vernon and the rest of the 515th were moving into position, executing War Plan Orange from General MacArthur and falling back to Bataan in the defense of Cockman Airfield. the Japanese would viciously push across the island. By April 9th, 1942, the men of the 515th and 200 were ordered to surrender, even though they wished to continue fighting to the end. On May 6th, Corregidor would fall, and the Japanese would have control of the Philippine Islands. From there, we're all familiar with the story, especially with our Bataan families. The men were marched from Bataan. They were first forced to turn out their pockets. Anybody found with any Japanese material was killed, assuming it was taken from a Japanese soldier. Men were beaten, killed for no reason, and tortured, starved, and thirst. The entire march from Bataan to the railheads at Krebsbach, and then from there they were tightly packed into rail cars and shipped off to Camp O'Donnell. The malnourished and thirsty men would fall victim to tropical diseases such as malaria and beriberi. O'Donnell would be the first of many stops for some of the men, but also the end of the line for others, as the continued harsh treatment by the Japanese would plague them through their stay there. In July, they were transferred to Cabanatuan. The conditions at Cabanatuan were not much better than O'Donnell, and many of the men would die there. Cabanatuan would eventually be liberated on January 30th, 1945. Vernon survived the entire death march and managed to make it to Cabanatuan. But unfortunately, he caught cerebral malaria and succumbed on August 28, 1942, according to Army records. He was buried in a mass grave at Cabanatuan. His family wasn't informed until April of 1943. The liberations of the Philippines would last until the end of the war, though General MacArthur would declare the liberation on July 5, 1945. The Japanese had been pushed into pockets, and many of them had managed to fall out of contact with Tokyo and never heard Emperor Hirohito's speech to surrender. The last holdouts in the Philippines eventually surrendered in March of 1974. It was 2 men. Japan officially surrendered aboard the USS Missouri on September 2nd, 1945. In December of that year, the 111th Quartermaster Graves Registration Platoon was given the task of exhuming the bodies at Cabanatuan and processing identification. They would use the ID tag, dog tags, any dental records that they had from processing to try and identify these men. Anybody they could not identify right away out of the graves was sent to Manila for further identification. In September of 1949, Vernon's family was contacted and informed that they had managed to identify Vernon, and he was sent back to Portales. The family was under strict instructions, with many other families, to under no circumstance open the casket. The funeral was attended by his friends, family, and other Bataan survivors. He was buried in Portales Cemetery, August 9, 1949, but his sister Jean and mother had a gut feeling that it wasn't him. In July of 1951, the 111th was ordered to cease all operations. The reason was because of the continued deterioration of the remains, errors in identification, the excessive handling of the remains, and the commingling of remains among other remains to try and get full remains to send home. They've been working with over 2,700 casualties, 99 of them being POWs, and they were all buried as unknowns at the Fort McKinley Cemetery, now the Manila American Cemetery Memorial. Now, if we jump ahead 72 years after he was supposedly buried, 79 years after his death, the Defense POW MIA accounting agency was working diligently to try and identify remains from Cabanatuan. They picked up where the 111th had left off. The DPA were working to identify a set of remains, and they contacted Vernon's family to try and get DNA to identify some of the Marines they were working with. After rigorous testing and examination, they managed to identify the remains they were working with as Vernon. Under the watchful eye of an honor guard, and with a layover in Dallas, Fort Worth for a plate change, and the honor guard from American Airlines, Vernon came home to Portales via Albuquerque. On June 8, 2023, he was laid to rest in Portales. His folded flag was given to his dear sister, Billie Jean, who was 15 the last time she saw her brother alive. So the question now becomes, who was in the grave for 75 years? That's what the DPAA is hoping to find out. They were formed in 2015 when a merger of several of the other accounting agencies in the Army. And in 2014, they had made a case was made by one of the apparent agencies that the technology had come far enough to try and identify the remains of Cabanatuan. The work was improved, and in 2017, 3 sets of remains were exhumed from the Command grave, from common graves 305 and 306. Vernon was supposedly had been identified from grave 306. 9 men were now on the table as to, of the 3 corpses, they could possibly be 9 men. Using the DNA they had on file, they managed to rule out several of the men, and after requesting samples from Vernon's family, they managed to come back with a match. They moved to have the body in the grave exhumed, returned to Honolulu, and sent Vernon home. So as I'm standing here talking, and you guys are sitting here listening to me, in Washington, D.C., a member of the 3rd Infantry Battalion is walking the mat in front of the grave of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Tomb of the Unknown Soldier has a very simple saying on it: "Here rests in honor and glory an American soldier known but to God." This saying was taken from what Rudyard Kipling, author of such works as Jungle Book and Gunga Din, chose for British unknowns, known unto God, for the passing of his son, John, at the Battle of Loos. What makes John and Vernon so alike? It took almost 80 years to identify them. Whereas John, they knew was missing, Vernon they thought they had identified. But John was identified by a military historian using deductive reasoning. Vernon took a more scientific approach. The Tomb of the Unknown stands for the men who are unknown, the men who are missing, and the men who the DPA is trying desperately to get home. 73,679 U.S. servicemen, women, and civilians are missing from World War II. This is about 80% of the 84,606 missing from U.S. conflicts since World War II, since recording started in 1972. Since the last time I managed to take a look at the DPA website, 1,723 of these men have been identified and counting. 562 of these people are New Mexicans from World War II. Of them, 75 are from Cabanatuan. If you look on the right-hand side of the exhibit over in the Bataan building, you will see the list of these men. Anyone who may have family who is missing from any U.S. conflict is encouraged to please go to the DPA's website and find out how you can help identify and assist them in completing their mission and getting these servicemen home. Thank you.